Hello, I'm Jake Lohwater. I'm a couples therapist in Colorado.
And I'm Nicole Parker, and I'm a couples therapist in Michigan. And I'm here with my friend and colleague Jake. And I thought, Jake, we could have a little conversation. And I'd love to ask you about your work, your business, how your perspective, and how you do your work uniquely. That sound good?
That sounds awesome. I love that.
Cool. So first, I want to know, Jake, for folks who don't know you yet, who do you help? Who do you like? Who's your ideal couple to help, and where do you practice?
Yeah. Great question. So I'm in Colorado. So I'm in Fort Collins, Colorado. So I see couples in person in Fort Collins in northern Colorado, and then I work with couples from all over the state, the Four Corners, down in Denver, all around. And the specialty that I focus on is working with empaths and engineers. So typically someone who's very um, I would call them deep feelers in the relationship, and then the deep thinkers in the relationship. They tend to attract each other. I've been doing this long enough. I see it repeated again and again, and I help them bridge the emotional and logical divides in their relationship, and help them translate what deep feeling looks like and how that gets communicated, and then what deep thinking looks like and how that gets digested and worked together. So we ultimately work on building a bridge towards empathy and understanding.
Yeah. As you were saying that, I was imagining like a canyon, a deep canyon, and one person's on the side, you shouting over it, and the other person's on the other side shouting, and they're like, "What?" I don't get. And you're gonna build that bridge across
That
that.
tends to be, yeah, how wide that canyon is. Sometimes it depends on how long they've been together. Yeah, using different information and access points oftentimes, yeah, pushes that canyon wider and wider over time.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay, so you work with the empaths and the engineers, sensitive partners though, right?
Yeah.
The empath. What do you notice about those empaths? What they like, what is the struggle that they seem to experience in relationships?
Yeah. Usually that struggle is either it's a couple of things, but too much or not enough. So their intuition, their feelings, their insight, how they see the relationship is either too much or not enough. There's often a lot of qualifiers I see that they struggle with too, which is they're being highly emotional or highly reactive. One of the most damaging is you're acting crazy, or I'm not going to engage with you when you're highly emotional. And oftentimes they usually struggle with invalidation of how I feel, like on a felt sense, everything in my body, all the wisdom that I carry. Um, is being dismissed. So I think, I guess to answer your question, I don't believe you is what they hear most often, which is that can't be true for you. Their partner often invalidates how they feel or how they experience the world or their relationship problems or the dynamics between them. So um, one of the things that I've seen in couples is getting to a place of I believe you is like a new chapter where they feel validated for how they feel and that it does become more of a superpower than more of a curse.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
It's never calming to feel not not believed.
Totally. Yes, it tends to make things worse, understandably. Yeah.
And we feel more in the moment.
It's a cycle. It does, yeah. It kind of perpetuates itself.
Awesome.
Mhm.
Um, okay, so many couples are, as you're calling out, like kind of just we're built different, we're wired different. Two people can be present for the same conversation and have very different experiences of that same conversation. Um, One person can feel everything and then the other kind of shuts down and checks out. How do you help couples like make sense of that? That they're both experiencing the same thing, but they're experiencing it very differently.
Hmm. Yeah, some of it um, comes down to that. I mean, honestly, the hardwire of where information comes from. So typically, young girls are acculturated towards emotional intelligence and emotional awareness and intuition and communication. And young boys are often told to really use logic and reason and, in a lot of ways cut off their emotional intelligence. And then years later, in long-term committed relationships, that becomes a problem because we have one partner that's using the gifts of their intuition, of the information that they have at their disposal. Like, what is true for me is a deep and rich emotional experience. That's the way in which I navigate all relationships in my life, and it's the way in which I navigate my relationship with my partner. And then the engineer tends to be very much like, well, logic and pragmatism and stoicism and reason without any emotion tells us this is the right path or this is the right way to do things. And so both of their experiences often are really true for them. It's how they've navigated the world up to maybe this point. What I see in relationships, though, is that there's a real lack or inability to understand that logic isn't inherently bad. It's just not attuned with emotion. And emotion isn't inherently bad. It's just not attuned with logic. And that you described it really well earlier, the divide that gets built over years of that kind of pattern repeating over and over again, it kind of digs heels in. So I see couples 10 or 20 years into their relationship, and that canyon is that bridge that we build is a long one because of how separate they are. Um, I also think that there's the way in which we navigate stress. And so, in times of stress, we all have our different physiological responses. And we can get into what that looks like. But ultimately, in stress, the different reactions that we have oftentimes don't translate to how our partner experiences themselves or the relationship or what we're talking about. So that wiring tends to be we just miscommunicate, we misunderstand a lot.
Mhm. Yeah.
Mhm.
We have to be able to like find value in understanding the other person's perspective because
Mhm.
logic isn't bad, emotion isn't bad. They each have a different value to bring to it. Yeah.
Mhm. Totally. Yeah. Subjective reality is it's true for you, um, not true for your partner. And that's where we need to work on understanding and empathy because um, nobody wants to feel alone in how they think or how they feel. But oftentimes that's the balance that happens in these kinds of relationships, which is feeling more alone instead of feeling more connected.
Yeah. Okay, we're gonna ask the myth question,
Sure.
um, mythbuster question. What is a big myth that you think that these empaths, the sensitive people, end up believing about themselves, especially in like love relationships?
Mhm. Yeah. I think the myth to bust is if I only turn off my emotions and meet my partner in logic, things will be better. That will figure it out. We'll make sense of it. So I think the myth to bust is that our emotions need to be eradicated or ignored or avoided. That tends to be usually what the logic-based partner is saying. Well, don't think about it from a place of intuition or emotions. Think about it just like a data point. But that doesn't work. So ultimately, emotion-focused partners need to learn and more accept that their information is through their emotions. Different data points to look at. It's almost a different map of an experience. And it's as valid as stoicism or pragmatism or logic. That they don't have to cancel each other out. No one's inherently right or inherently wrong. And you see that, I'm sure, in your couples therapy session too, that debate of whose reality wins. And that's pretty much, it's just off topic because both realities are valid. Um, so the myth to bust is that emotions are helpful and insightful and important, and that the logic-based partner actually needs to understand those um, as a kind of a guiding force for their partner to build that bridge towards more emotional intelligence and more emotional awareness, and ultimately more attunement with each other's brains, but also with each other's hearts.
Yeah, because if you're saying we believe like we're too much,
Mhm.
then the myth is, well, I should be less. Be less me. Be less
Right.
emo.
Yeah, of course.
That's not
Yeah,
gonna
take
work.
that down a lot, that's not
Ross.
gonna work. Right. That's not gonna
Um,
work. Yeah.
okay. I want to ask you about the neuroscience
Mhm.
perspective because you bring a lot of that knowledge, and also bridging that with real and practical tools that for couples to use in everyday life, right? What's one thing that someone can try this week if they feel emotionally alone? Because we're maybe not actually alone, but we can still really feel alone. What do you
Oh,
think?
definitely. Yeah. I think well that speaks a bit to the roadmap that I work with, which is in three parts. And so we all know what it feels like to feel alone, and that feels uncomfortable, and we want to run away from that. We want to busy ourselves or find comfort somewhere. The tool I teach couples and individuals in my practice is about self relationship. So, what does it look like to be curious about what's going on for ourselves? So, what are we feeling alone about? Getting curious when our maybe our partner isn't curious. That if we're feeling alone in the relationship, and why? What's going on? What are the needs that aren't getting met in the relationship? What feels exposed or more vulnerable? And so some of that is addressing the self relationship. So where am I hurting and why? And doing a bit of a self process to understand um, I'm feeling really upset because my partner just dismissed a conversation that I really want to have. And that's happened again and again. And that gets to a deeper need of wanting to feel validated, feel accepted, feel loved or cared for, and that we can understand what wound is getting exposed through that process of understanding ourselves. And I think that one is most, and not most important, but that is the beginning of that three-phase process to look at ourselves first. What's our relationship with ourselves first? What's hurting? And then number two is looking at the relationship dynamic with our partner, how we can work on repair and reconciliation, how we can build communication and conflict in a way that's more productive and efficient. And then number three is building in more sustainability for the long haul, for the long term of some ways, the nuts and bolts, this is where the engineers really like that logic based. Well, what does a sustainable relationship really look like with an emotionally focused partner? And when we work together on that, when we get there, we build the beautiful bridge. It takes us to what's next.
Yeah, and what do I do? Tell me what to do now, right? And
Mhm.
usually that's the last thing, actually. That's
That's
the
the
end.
last thing. Yeah.
Yeah, we can't know what to do until we really understand a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think something to do today, watching this video, is checking in with where am I hurting and why? Like what is really going on? Because oftentimes the logic-based partner wants to just solve for X, they want to solve the problem. Um, they want to get on to whatever's next and in some ways skip over what's missing or what's lacking. being able to self-process to say, I'm going to look at what's hurting and what I need brings more data and more information to the table. And then then that second part of being to be in relationship and in communication about what's hurting and what's needed, there's like, okay, well, there's some solutions and there's some fixes, but it's also from a place of like emotional vulnerability, um, and emotional truth, which often does get missed in the fix it phase.
Yeah. So we have to connect with ourselves so then we can also articulate it to our
Yeah,
partners.
definitely. And that really is the hardest part in some ways is the articulation, is how to communicate in a way that our partner can understand. And we also work on the other partner's ability to lean in, to understand what really is going on, and listen more deeply.
Mhm. Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, okay. So where can folks go if they are tired of feeling misunderstood by each other, feeling too much, or maybe the engineer not enough, not emotional enough to, and they want to work with someone who understands those struggles?
Mm. Yeah. Well, I'm doing a lot of videos on YouTube right now, so subscribing to this channel is helpful. There's a lot of talking points that I speak to for both parties, the empath and the engineer, in terms of breaking down both experiences and understanding what's really needed. You can also drop a link in the description to fill out an application to work with me. I have a limited number of spots that I work with couples and individuals on. And I offer a free 45-minute consultation call to talk through a lot of these topics, the pretty high level issues in the relationships and the barriers that couples have experienced, and then address solutions from a place of both emotion and logic that both partners are right about what's needed to address the relationship. And there's a lot in terms of collaboration that we can work on together. Typically, from that discovery call, too, there's a couple of things like we talked about today, things to do right now in the relationship to move in the right direction, to improve things incrementally for the long haul. Because what we know about big changes like New Year's resolutions is they end up not working because it's not really small enough, it's not sustainable enough. And that's really what we work on is building in sustainable solutions that will help couples feel more realigned and reattuned with one another for the long haul.
Yeah. Yeah. Wonderful. Awesome. Well, thank you very much for your time today.
Yeah, you're
It's a
welcome.
pleasure learning about like your little corner of this world, what you really focus on and what you specialize with. And I think that's going to resonate for a lot of people. I know it's those yin to my yang couples.
Yeah.
It's fun in the beginning, and then we start to have the struggles over time. But
Mhm.
that's every single couple at the
That's
same
true.
time.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
All
thank
right.
you so much. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks, Jake.
Yeah.